Okay, this is the next episode in the Gorilla Cooking series. The previous one that I did to this, I did a modernized trench stew. I took a common recipe from the British Army from World War I, made some slight changes on it. Today I'm going to do a very common recipe that was made by American troops in World War I. They got huge amounts of canned corned beef also. And, they would make some trench stew, but they also came up with their own recipes that were just, they were U.S. Now, the most common recipe they did, or type, was something known as corn Willy. And when you break it down, it's corned beef hash. So this is actually known by multiple names. It's known as corn Willy. It's known as corn Willy hash. Corned beef hash, canned corned beef hash. The name that I'm going to use for this particular version, I'm going to call it corned beef Willie. That's a name that's used by a World War I reenactor who did a similar video to this a few years ago. I came across it. That's how I found out about this. And then I did some researching on the recipes and that stuff. I am going to do a variation of this for the next video. That one I will call corn Willy, and it'll make sense when you see the ingredients that go in it. Now for this one, like with the British recipe, you're going to need one medium-sized potato, which I already have cooking because you got to boil it to get the potatoes tender. The reason you boil it, not fry it, is you're going to need some of that starch water as part of the recipe. You also need half a tin of canned corned beef, and then seasonings. It's really simple recipe, really straightforward. I did it myself for my breakfast yesterday just to try it out. Turned out really good. Now there's some options that you can do to this, variations obviously. So according to the most common things I've come across in the recipes for this, they say boil the potato after you cube it up. And by now you should know, cut it up to 1/2 inch thick cubes at most, because you want this to cook through thoroughly. This you will put over a decent heat because you want to boil it. You boil it until it is fork tender, according to the recipe books from World War I, or the ones that were made by the troops afterwards. Now, I personally am not poking this with a fork to find out. My test is on this, it will darken. You know what your potato looked like when you cut it up. So you want it to get a little darker, kind of a grayish color. What we're doing right now, we're forcing out some of the starch and softening up the potatoes. Now, when the potatoes are ready, we pull this off, and we're going to transfer the potatoes over to a fry pan. For those that aren't aware of it, the mess kit used by U.S. troops in World War I was the fry pan style, which looked essentially like this. When they prepped the potatoes, they did it inside their canteen cup, then forked the stuff out of that into the pan from their mess kit, and then continued on with the recipe there. Once the potatoes are done, the rest of it goes really fast for cooking. The longest time you're going to have is boiling the potatoes. When I did this yesterday, I did it in about a half hour. About half the time was prepping the potato, cutting it into pieces, and boiling it. That's why I jumped ahead on that before we started the video. Now, a little history on this. I found out that this recipe was so popular with the U.S. troops, they actually used to name areas right behind their trench lines as Corn Willy Hill, Corn Willy Pasture, and stuff like that. Those are the areas they would go to actually make this when they were not in the trenches, when they were on their rest time behind the trench. It almost looks to me like this is getting almost done, so I am going to start getting ready here. So I don't want to burn a hole in my tarp. The mess kit I am using for this is actually Combat Cameraman's personal mess kit, because he has a style, a knockoff version of the Boy Scout mess kit that is a fry pan plus the pot. This is really good for this recipe, I believe. Now the water that the potatoes are boiling in, according to the World War I recipes, it's said to add a little bit of salt. So you're boiling this in salt water. How much? None of the recipes said. There's not too much for measurements when it comes to spices in the World War I recipes. It's all kind of to taste or what you have available, what you want to use. But I put in approximately or close to 1 teaspoon of salt. You can go a little less if you want to, but 1 teaspoon seems to work really good. Now, while that's finishing up there, when we transfer it to the fry pan, you need to put some type of fat in here to fry with. Now, the recipes from World War I said you could use bacon grease, you can use butter. I decided to grab a little bit of leftover butter here. How much you add? It's up to you. Whatever amount you think you need. The butter or the bacon grease will add to the taste. If you don't have either of those, cooking oil will work just fine. Okay, pull this off. Now we're going to spoon over the potatoes. You only use just enough water to go up over the top of the potatoes when you're frying. Now, if you have a lot of water left, you're supposed to get rid of some of it. I only have a little bit, and this will work just fine for the next stage here, so to speak. Now, in this water, you're going to add 1 beef bouillon cube. So with the hot starchy water off the fire here, we just toss in bouillon cube. Try to crush it up, mix it up in there. Now, according to the World War I recipes, they said when you transfer in the potatoes and you start frying it, do it over a low heat. Butter hasn't fully melted yet, so I'm just going to let that do its thing. Now, according to the recipes, it said brown the potatoes using the butter. I have never been able to brown potatoes for homemade hash when I've done it for myself. I actually ended up with a lot more butter in here than what I thought, so maybe I only needed about half of what I had, but that'll be fine. Okay, now I'm going to add my little gravy here. And then kind of mix this all together. Now, typically you're going to add your little fake beef gravy in here after you cook down most of the butter. So you're adding the starch water with beef bouillon to allow it to continue to fry on. I'm going to turn this up a bit because I put in too much butter. Now, for those of you that aren't aware of it, you can take butter and bacon fat with you in the field. You would store it in something like this, a West German butter dish. Logistics wise, for your people, when you're trying to supply them, it's usually easier to just supply cooking oil. But if the troops were able to get a hold of some bacon, don't just get rid of the grease and stuff from your fry pan right afterwards. Let it cool down, spoon off that fat from the top, put it in something like this and save it. It will last. It's not shelf stable for an extremely long time, but it will last at least a few days. Now, while that's going, I'm going to prep my corned beef. Just make a little note here. Take your key, put it on, and then go reverse it along the seam there, and it just pops. Now I need approximately half the can. Use the back side of my knife here, kind of go around the beef in the can so I can kind of work it out a little bit. And then I will estimate about half. And just like with the British, the other half of your corned beef, you passed off to your battle buddy so that he could do his food. Okay, I think we're at the point now we can add in the corned beef. Let that just kind of cook a little bit. Now, according to the recipe, it says let it sit, brown on one side for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then spoon it over and do the same thing on the other side. But But really, that's up to you. As you see, we boiled down or boiled off most of the butter now. The fat inside the corned beef will start melting a little bit more here soon. Now, I'm going to do a variation on this. According to the recipes that were transcribed, written down in recipe books after World War I by the troops, you can add stuff to this. One of the recommendations is, you probably didn't do this too much in a trench, but you would put a fried egg on top or a poached egg on top. Another thing that I found in a recipe book from the 1930s, they said add in some fresh parsley. Well, you're probably not going to have fresh parsley in the field, but something that we can get a hold of is Italian seasoning. Now, first off here, I'm going to add in some black pepper. It said add in black pepper to taste. And then I'm going to add in some Italian seasoning now. Let it kind of rehydrate in there. Then I will put in a little bit more for looks and taste here again. Add just a little bit more. You already have salt in here from the salt water you boiled the potatoes in. That you put your beef bouillon in to make kind of that little ersatz gravy with it. So at this point, you cook it to taste. If you want it to be a little bit drier, go ahead. Cook it till it's a little bit drier. But this is basically the consistency of most hashes you're going to get even if you go to a restaurant. So I'm going to say that this is done. Now I will ask Combat Cameraman if he wants to try any. He does. So I will spoon him up a little bit here for him to try. The amount prepared is one person's worth. So I'll pass that off to him. I don't want this to burn in here. See what he says. And we got a thumbs up from Combat Cameraman. Normally he doesn't eat hash, so maybe this is a recipe he actually likes. So there you go. Corned beef Willie, a popular recipe with the troops in World War I, most typically known as corn Willie. I'm calling this corned beef Willie because I'm going to do a variation on this tomorrow with the leftovers from today. Now, for all my engineer brothers and the Patriot Militia movements, always remember, essayons.